Good afternoon, everyone. I go by NabismoPrime on Nostr, and this is a much simpler presentation than what you just saw. This is building your own relay for beginners, and this is really tailored more towards people with little to no technical experience. So we're going to start off with some painfully simple description of what a relay is to start, and end with a demonstration of actually building a relay. So to start off, what is a relay? Relays are really the backbone of the Nostr protocol. We are replacing the servers that typically run in the centralized services and decentralizing those across the globe. They are ultimately responsible for storing and serving all the notes that are served to clients. A client requests events, relays respond with events or with a message saying they don't have that. It's a very specific type of server that has one job, incredibly simple, and without them Nostr wouldn't exist. What relays look like under the hood, they all differ a little bit, but in kind of a service-oriented architecture, they typically consist of some logic to handle WebSocket connections. We need to keep, first of all, accept WebSocket connections, keep track of who is connected, and make sure that we're serving the requested events back to the proper clients. There's also logic for event handling, specifically writing events and using logic to filter out the requested events from the database. The database is an organized way of storing notes with persistent storage so that the clients can request it using the agreed upon syntax, and then we will serve that back to the client. And most projects contain a cache as well, which is a simpler database of just key value pairs, and they are held in memory for non-persistent storage because it is much quicker to serve those frequently requested requests, I guess, from memory instead of actually making a database query and having to search through the entirety of the database. And typically, a lot of relays will often sit behind a reverse proxy that is changing those or upgrading those HTTPS connections to WebSocket connections. Why would you want to run your own relay? Because you could have more control of your data. You can choose which relays you're writing to. You could store your own data. You could make this private if you wanted to. You can curate content, restrict posting to certain NPubs like a paid relay or some other sort of mechanism to vet who's posting to that. You can also build communities around relays, and it's a really fun way to learn more about the network or the protocol really, and support it as well. At the bare minimum to run a relay, you need your own domain, an SSL certificate to encrypt data between the client and the relay, a server to host this, and some actual relay software to respond to the requests. Where would you host a relay? There was some interesting discussion about this morning, and I forget the name of the project because jet lag just hit me like a ton of bricks. I host in the cloud on virtual private servers, and there's a couple reasons for that. The hardware is maintained by the cloud provider. You maintain the operating system, network security, and your own software. It's very convenient, but there are trade-offs. You can absolutely be rugged if AWS decides to just close my account or for whatever reason ran into some throttling issues with one of the relays I was working on. I had built a serverless relay and they were throttling me in certain regions. So I was very much at the mercy of the cloud provider. But I think it's easier, and I think it's an acceptable trade-off in my book, especially where one of the biggest bottlenecks, I guess, or one of the largest contributors to latency is the proximity of the client to the actual relay. So if you can maintain a presence in multiple regions, you can ultimately serve clients around the globe faster than having just one server, say, hosted out of your living room or something. You can self-host these, and there are people that do. I don't, just because of the reasons I stated earlier. It's easier to just re-image things in the cloud. I can spin up, spin down, and have that global presence. And it's a lot harder if you are sitting behind a NAT router, which most home networks are. To be able to make that reachable to clients outside of your network, you would either need to port forward on your router. So you have a number of devices behind your home router that are all sharing that same public IP. I don't want to broadcast my home public IP, as well as that's also a dynamic IP address. Your internet service provider can refresh that at any time, and you would need to update your DNS records to reflect that, or it's going to resolve to the wrong IP address. As well as when you're putting that out there, you are letting everyone know. It's pretty easy to see where that IP address is geographically, as well as if you have other things in your home network, you're potentially opening your home network up to adversaries. For people could port scan you, find out if you're running any other services. You could open yourself up to denial of service or distributed denial of service attacks. Neither of which I want on my home network. And as mentioned earlier, to run a relay, you do need to get a domain name from a domain registrar. There are several different companies that can do this. You typically do need to provide some information for, I forget what the actual name of it is, but you'll need a name, email address. You can make up an email address. There are certain services that you can use where you can pay in Bitcoin or do this somewhat anonymously. You'll need a server, whether that is hardware that you're hosting yourself or infrastructure somewhere in the cloud. You'll need to be able to clone a repository. I have people ask me what that is quite often. A repository is just I guess where the relay code lives, and you can clone that and you can make changes to it. You're basically downloading, or not downloading, or I guess you are downloading, a local copy of the code that is available for everybody to share, and you usually need to either compile it yourself or make some sort of adjustments to reflect your own domain name, username and passwords for the database, or any other personalization that needs to be done. It's not something that you would click and just download. There might be implementations out there that do this, where you can just pretty much plug and play, but a lot of them require some modification to fit your setup. Some of the basic networking, you should only be opening the ports that you need. At a bare minimum, you'll need a port 443 opened. For the actual clients to connect, that's where they're going to be starting their HTTPS connections, and your proxy should upgrade that to WebSocket connections. Port 80 will need to be open at some point to if you're using Let's Encrypt for a certificate authority, they'll need to make a connection, verify that you own that domain, and then issue that certificate so that you can make secure WebSocket connections. And then you should also have port 22 open to create a secure shell so that you could administer your own relay. But you should limit that in, not make that open to all IP addresses, just basically what IP addresses you would expect to connect to that relay from to administer the relay. I've helped a number of people set up relays, and I've run into a number of interpretations of the directions for setting up a relay. There are some really good, and there are more coming out daily, instructions on how to run your own relay, but I see a lot of people getting stuck on the same things. A lot of them are networking issues. Some of them are just insufficient resources available to the relay. The database container may not start. Another big one is running commands from the wrong directories. If you're running a command that references a file as an argument, or you're actually executing a binary, I'll see people running these commands from the incorrect directory, and if whatever you're trying to access isn't in that file path, it's not going to work. I also see command line text editors can be kind of tricky, especially if you're using Vim or something. I see people edit these, might figure it out from some quick Googling, but then they don't save it correctly and just exit, and it has all the default settings as far as like a placeholder for a domain name, the wrong passwords or username, and it can be kind of difficult to track these errors down in error logs. And of course, if you leave the, or I've seen a lot of mistakes in setting up the actual subdomain, and people's domain names are not resolving to the correct IP at all. So obviously clients won't be able to find you if your domain name does not redirect to the correct IP. A couple of things to be mindful of when running a relay. These things cost money, especially if you are running in the cloud. Infrastructure isn't cheap. I know I have been hit with several surprise AWS bills over the years, and I'm sure a number of people in the room have as well. And storage can be quite costly as well. And there's also some interesting conversations around how long relays should be storing things for, and how things are going to look for relays in a couple of years. Is it viable to store all events for all of eternity? Somebody's paying for this at some point, and what is the incentive for the relay operator to keep paying for this month after month? Because a lot of the paid relays, what you collect in fees to post that, I guess it depends on the volume of your relay and how much you're paying, probably isn't going to cover your costs at the end of the month. I know right now I'm not making any money off it. I did run a paid relay at some point, and I had maybe 15 people that had paid to 1,000 sats each, so 15,000 sats for something that cost me about $15-20 at least a month to run. So that's not sustainable in the long run. As well as there's been some interesting conversations about legal issues with content you're storing and serving. There are people working on ways to kind of filter what people can post to relays, but if people are uploading illegal content to your relays and you're storing that and serving that, I don't know exactly what the laws are around that, and I guess it would depend on what jurisdiction you're hosting it out of, but I think it's quite reasonable to believe that you could end up with some legal action taken against you if you became of interest to some regulatory authority. And I wanted to kind of go through actually building a relay and kind of talking about what we're doing as we're setting this up. So I had actually written a relay in Python, and it is not the fastest. It is not the it is not as well architected as some of the other relays, especially like Stir-Fry, or even Nostr is probably like 100 times faster. And I kind of copied the architecture for Nostr and rewrote it in some very simple Python scripts and packaged everything into containers and then wrote some server setup scripts so that a user can basically just execute a set of scripts on a fresh Ubuntu VPS instance, and it will create or install a reverse proxy, request an SSL certificate, add in a number of environmental variables like your domain name, usernames, passwords, and then bring up the relay in a Docker Compose stack so that everything has its dependencies packaged within their containers. So to do this, let's go ahead and spin up an EC2 instance real quick. And I'm using AWS because this is just where I'm most comfortable, but there are a number of cloud providers out there that I would recommend, like Linode or DigitalOcean. Those can be a bit simpler, but AWS is familiar to me, and there are a number of other products you can use with this. If you're using S3 buckets for storage or have some other sort of distributed architecture. So we're going to go with a pretty small instance here. We only need one virtual CPU and about 2 gigabytes of memory. And going back to our discussion about a firewall here, this is a very simple firewall managed by AWS. We're just going to create a really simple security group that allows SSH traffic. I'm allowing it from anywhere right now because I don't know what my IP address is. Allowing HTTPS traffic, that's going to be ultimately our clients connecting, and then HTTP for the certificate authority to issue that certificate. Let's go ahead and create this. And once we have a public IP, we'll go ahead and create a domain record for this. And I'm just using a subdomain. And this should broadcast pretty quickly. Go ahead and SSH into our newly created server. Okay, and we are in. We'll then go ahead and just create a sudo user real quickly. Log in as that user. And we're going to go back to actually clone that repository. So we're going to take that code that I have hosted on GitHub and pull that into our server so that we can input our variables. So as mentioned, I'm going to leave the default database user and password that I have in there, but I am going to change the domain name because we're ultimately going to use that to issue a certificate. Put in an API key for a monitoring tool that I use. And then we are all set to actually start the menu and run the setup script to prepare a server. And what this is doing is this is updating the package manager repository. It is going to install the dependencies that are needed on the server to actually run the relay. It is going to create that reverse proxy we were talking about and request the certificate. And then once we have Docker installed and all that stuff, we can actually build our containers. And like I said, we're just using a Docker Compose stack. I've got a WebSocket handler container, an event handler container, a Postgres database container, and a container for the monitoring tool I use as well as a Redis cache. And for anyone that doesn't know what a container is, it is a type of virtualization. It's basically a mini operating system where you can package your code with all the dependencies that it needs so that it's portable. You can run it on different machines. It's often used in modern web applications. Here we go. Okay, and we're requesting a certificate. And I made a typo. Maybe not. Okay, no. Okay. And now we can actually start our relay. And what this is doing right now is this is building the Docker containers. It is downloading all the dependencies, going through a couple of the steps that I have set out here to prepare those and pulling in the actual code that I've written into those containers. And this relay is an incredibly simple relay. It is just an event handler and a WebSocket handler. There's no nothing really special about this. It's not the fastest, but it works. It does have some rate limiting mechanism built into it where it's basically a number of tokens that the user is issued in a certain amount of time, and if you're posting too often or requesting too often, you're using those tokens, and if you use up your token allowance, then you are disconnected and no longer able to post or request from the relay. And while we're waiting for that, I've got a little command line tool that I've built here. And what this does is this is just going to programmatically post notes. Let's wait till this is up. And we're just going to confirm everything's running okay. Okay. This one's still starting. Cool. Let this run for a second. All right, and we are making a request with the client. I know we've got Hodlebod in the audience right now, and it looks like we are scoped to the relay that we just built, and we're looking at all the random events I just generated with that little command line tool. And as you can see, things are going kind of smoothly. As I said, it's written in Python. It is not fast, but it's fast enough. I don't think this would probably be good for something like Damus or something that's under really heavy load. Python is one of the slowest, if not the actual slowest programming languages, and some people don't consider it a programming language either because it's actually an interpreted language. It's more of a scripting language, but it seems to work. It's pretty simple to set up, and I think that it could be a fun little tool for some people that are not developers themselves and would like to set up a relay to play around with minimal work on their end. And that is pretty much it. I think I had just some ways to get in touch. If there is any way that I could help anyone that's curious about running their own relay, I'm more than happy to do so. I'm also open to any sort of critique that somebody might have for this relay project. And that's pretty much it. Any questions? Do we have a mic? Xfrog asked me to have people ask questions into the mic for. Thank you. I think it's off.
Hello? Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing. I have one question, but of two parts, if that's okay.
Sure.
I wonder how plug and play is it to run a relay? Like, basically, what kind of commitment do I need to make? If we contrast it, say, with Bitcoin, where a Bitcoin node is easy to run, but a Lightning node, you need some TLC every day with the channels. Once I've done the VPS, the DNS, what am I looking at on a daily basis? And then the second part, the risks you outlined. The main one that comes to my mind is the traffic, the bandwidth on the server. That would be, I don't know if there are any VPSs that give you like unlimited bandwidth, or is there a way to solve that, like whitelisting, or maybe you have some thoughts and wisdom on this?
Well, let me answer the first question. There isn't much maintenance on a day-to-day basis. Everything is pretty much running on its own, doesn't really require much upkeep. If you have a static IP address, I wouldn't expect any upkeep on the DNS records. The cool thing about containers is if they fail for whatever reason, you can set them to always restart so that it'll just regenerate. There have been several instances where I found bugs where, like I said, I have monitoring tools deployed where I'll notice that a container failed and maybe didn't restart or was in some sort of like crash loop back off. But I guess the short answer to that question is not much. You should be able to just kind of leave it, and it should run for a while. This is only maybe 3 or 4 months old. I've left one running in my staging environment, haven't touched it since, and I haven't had any issues. As far as restricting traffic, that's a very good point. A lot of cloud providers do meter the traffic that you can have both inbound and outbound. I haven't come up on that threshold where it's cost me, like it costs a little bit. I could go over my actual AWS bill and get like a more realistic figure, but as far as mitigating that, I think a firewall could be somewhat useful. The kind of token-based rate limiter is helpful as well, where it's cutting people off before they become a problem, but they're still connecting in the first place. So there isn't really a clear solution in mind as far as how to limit that before it becomes a problem that you're paying for. I mean, it could absolutely become a problem where you just go to check your bill one month and you're paying a fortune, and AWS is notorious for egress costs. I haven't had this happen with this particular project, but I have had that happen with some other stuff that I built where I went to go check in on it and there was some malicious traffic or just much higher than expected traffic, and because of the way I had set up the network with like private link or some other tool, it depends on like what cloud services you're using as well, it could get kind of expensive. Anyone else?
Sorry, do you happen to know of any good options for non-KYC VPS providers?
There's some that I have come across in the past. I can't think of any by name. I'm not really using any at the moment. There are some out there, though, as far as how what kind of availability they offer as well. I'm not sure. I did come across one in my research, and I'm struggling to think of the name of it right now, but no, I guess. I don't know if any off the top of my head, but they absolutely are out there. You can pay in Bitcoin for some of them, but again, I don't know what kind of... Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I don't have a more specific answer for that.